With you, man. It's been a wild ride.
Look at got the official. Love it.
Yeah. So hey, we're pleased to be joined in person for the first time. Jesse Simonton, On3 Sports. You've been here covering the entire event. What's main takeaways after 4 days of covering?
I mean, obviously, it's always a circus. You guys know. I mean, it's. I think even here in Atlanta, with the College Football Hall of Fame, it's kind of running around like chicken with your head cut off because it's in Hoover. At least everything's very structured and set up. But they kind of have radio rows on the third level here, and then you got to go down and around for some of the other interview stuff. But I think the most interesting thing as we kind of wrap up day 4 is just kind of the varied opinions on who's going to finish second in the East and West. Because to me, I think that's probably the most interesting. Alabama is going to be Alabama. Georgia is going to be Georgia. And I'm of the opinion that those two are definitely going to meet again, for the third straight year in the SEC championship game, or third time, I should say, in the SEC championship game. But who finishes second? I'm someone that I believe Tennessee in the East. To me, I think if the pieces can come together defensively, and that starts with the back end, the secondary, Trayvon Flowers is here, but he's just one guy. How many corners do they have? Who's healthy? Which of those transfers, is it a Wesley Walker or a Turrentine that can kind of, help stabilize some things in the back end? Because they're going to score points. And so it's how many stops can you get in a game that's going to matter. Obviously, a lot of folks like Kentucky. A lot of folks also are optimistic about South Carolina. The Kentucky argument makes total sense to me in terms of scheduling. Their schedules just put it next to Tennessee, and one certainly looks much easier than the other.
I have Kentucky number 2, but I'm not saying that Tennessee won't beat Kentucky. It's just the rest of their schedule. I just like their path a little bit more than I do Tennessee.
Yeah, and Tennessee's had Kentucky's number. Even with Tennessee's struggles in recent years, they've kind of had Kentucky's number. It's kind of been this little Florida starting to struggle against Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Tennessee can't beat Florida, but the Vols can beat the Wildcats. It's kind of this whole little Bermuda Triangle of the SEC East there.
No, speaking to your point, Tennessee, Kentucky, I'm the only one, I think, at this whole event. I got Florida number 2 in the East. And we even had
Explain yourself, SEC Mike.
We had a Florida guy up here. He basically made us shut down the podcast when I said that. But, all right, so they host Kentucky. I know it's early, but I think that's a game where Florida all off season, that's the one they're going to be circling. This is why Dan Mullen's not here anymore, because he kept losing to damn Kentucky. We're getting them in Gainesville. I think Florida can get that win. And when it comes to Tennessee, hell, I mean, we do this every other year. This is the year Tennessee's going to beat Florida at home. I think it's a mental block. I just do not think Tennessee can beat Florida for whatever reason, and I'm not picking that until I see it on the field, other than Juwan Jennings, can a duck pull a truck, and probably the biggest one of all, Anthony Richardson. I think he's going to explode this year. Billy Napier, 16-3 overall record in one-score games. I think Florida's going to play defense, pound the ball, lean on Anthony Richardson to make 5 big plays a game, and pull in some of these one-score games.
I mean, again, you can certainly make that argument. I think that I'm as high on Anthony Richardson as anybody. Right now, it's all potential.
Right.
We haven't seen it. There's a lot of SEC quarterbacks like that. Will Levis is like that. Spencer Rattler's like that. I think the concerns with Florida is what kind of surrounds Anthony Richardson. I don't know how much speed they have on the perimeter, and that's going to be a problem later in the season. Their schedule's hell, too. I mean, they play A&M and LSU this year, so that's not going to be a whole lot of fun. What happens if they don't start well? That's what I'm also interested in with Billy Napier, because they did bring him in to do the things that Dan Mullen could not, which is recruit elite talent. But there was also some cultural issues in Gainesville, and that's not a light switch. You don't just turn that off or turn it on. So if Florida starts 0-2, we know they have, Utah to start, Kentucky week 2, like you said.
This could backfire on me early, no doubt.
It could backfire on you. At the same time, if not win for Tennessee, if they can't beat Florida this year, with a Gators team that's in transition, Napier's overhauling that roster, trying to bring in some fresh faces. I think that would be quite the demerit on a Josh Heupel year too. Not to say that it's some sort of like end all be all, but you're saying you got to see it to believe it. That's why this seems to be the time.
Yeah.
We didn't bring him over here to talk about that damn team, So listen, I want to get back to the Tennessee Volunteers. One of the small room conversations Tillman lit up when he started talking about running backs. I've seen the small video come. I don't know if that thing was sped up, but the footwork looks good. What is this backfield going to look like this year?
Yeah, I think Tennessee's backfield is going to be solid. It's funny because everyone thinks with Heupel's offense, it's all about throwing the ball and the temp. But what really makes that engine churn is the fact that you're just constantly handing the ball up the middle, and then you just fire down the seams. And so, Jabari's a guy, I saw him as a recruit, when I was at VolQuest, and he's a guy, he's not the fastest, he's not the biggest, but he's cut and go. And that's perfect for this inside zone scheme where it's RPO heavy, boom, hand it off immediately, or Hooker's, gonna crank it deep. And again, with the amount of tempo and plays that Tennessee runs, that run game's always going to be effective. I do think they would like to have it be a little more explosive. We saw it in flashes. Obviously, the one kid's not here anymore, transferred out. But he's going to have some help, and whether that's a Jalen Wright, who does have some, he's got the burn that Jabari doesn't have. So that's going to be important. And Tennessee's going to rotate backs. They're going to put in multiple guys back there, but I think Jabari certainly is kind of RB1 for them heading into the fall.
Whenever people talk Tennessee, they always circle that Florida game, and now Kentucky, and then the dream season. We're talking Alabama and Georgia. Maybe they could beat one of those. But is everybody overlooking?
Now you have them catch them one, right? You haven't beaten Georgia, right?
No. That was someone else.
Okay.
I got South Carolina beating Georgia. But
That's right. I knew it was somebody. Oh, yeah.
But are Tennessee fans overlooking Pitt? Because I talked to a lot of people on this show.
Yes, they are.
Gambling experts saying Pitt's the underdog at home. He's putting all his money on Pitt. I have analytics people on. They basically say it's a toss-up game. Could that game dictate the season for Tennessee?
Oh, so I don't know if it could. Yeah, I guess it depends on how into the weeds in terms of dictating the season. It certainly could dictate the month of September. I think you lose that game, it changes the tenor of the Florida game, in my opinion, because the hype won't be as big. The excitement in terms of recruiting, and Neyland's always going to be loud and boisterous, but if you go in there 3-0 and hosting the Gators, it would be a lot different than if you stumbled at Pitt, especially when Tennessee folks thought they should have beat them last year.
Right.
But I think I think people are like, oh, Kenny Pickett's not there, Jordan Addison's gone, so it's not. Narduzzi returns almost all of his defensive linemen, almost all of his offensive linemen. They have, he's a guy that is just kind of. He may not be a whole lot of fun to talk to, but he gets the most out of his football players, and that team's it's gonna be a competitive game. Tennessee cannot just walk up to Pittsburgh and think that they're gonna leave the Steel City.
And they brought in a transfer quarterback that's pretty touted too, I think.
Yeah, they brought in Kiffin Slovis. He's again, that's the crazy triangle where. He left Southern Cal, and Daniels, all these guys lose their job, and now Lincoln Riley's. College football's wild right now.
I want to talk to you about the stadium. Obviously, I was happy to see the balls go back up. You've got two sets of them now, but I've not been inside the stadium. Have you got a chance to look around and see what Neyland's going to look like next year?
I have not been in Neyland in a minute, so no, I have not been in Neyland in a minute.
Are you buying the South Carolina hype? I wanted to ask you, but because again, I had another guy on, analytics guy. I told him my upset pick. He's like, "Yeah, we got the Gamecocks 9% chance of beating Georgia." So I feel like walking that back right away. But do you think South Carolina can take that next step?
My kind of off-season viewpoint of South Carolina has not really changed in terms of I've gotten to know Shane a little bit, and I do think that he is. I wrote a big column on it earlier this week. I think that he is the perfect personality for that job. He's unabashedly Shane Beamer, and it's a little corny, and it's full of boundless energy, but it's what needed to happen in Columbia to kind of change the culture and the characteristics of that football team. And we saw it come to fruition in year one. I mean, they were a 2 or 3 win team, picked to win only 2 or 3 win games. You win 7, but the margins are so small. And so even though Spencer Rattler's there, even though they have a bunch of other transfers that they're really excited about, I think they could be a better team with a worse or same record. Because, again, schedule's hell. And last season, there was kind of a twofer there. They won a couple close games. Vandy could have gone either way. Troy really could have gone either way.
ECU.
Another one. And then they kind of caught some teams that folded a little bit. Florida being one of those. Auburn being the other. And then when you look at the margins against Georgia, A&M, and Clemson, not pretty. So I do think maybe those margins shrink a little bit, but maybe you lose one of those 50-50 games, and suddenly it's the same 7-6 deal or a 6-6 season, but they're not 13th in every single offensive category like they were a year ago.
Yeah. Now, I know you had a little fun with my SEC quarterback rankings.
Oh, that was
a little while back.
That was a good one. I loved it.
Hey, that's our top show of the month right now.
Hey,
it's going well.
You got to talk quarterbacks.
Exactly. So I had Stetson, number 10 in the SEC. Thoughts on that? You got a lot more respect for him than that?
I guess my question for your quarterback rankings, which I'd love to have you explain, is it all projection? Is it, how did you come to your list in terms of, because I agree with you that if we polled every coach in the SEC, Mark Stoops is not going to trade Will Levis for Stetson Bennett. Napier's not going to trade Richardson for Stetson Bennett. And go on down. And you probably would get pretty close to 10th. But then I look at and I say, this is a kid that outdueled the Heisman Trophy winner in the national championship game. Georgia's offense last season has been, I think, just routinely overlooked because of how historic the defense was. Lead the SEC in yards per play. They're top 10 in explosiveness, long explosive plays, passing efficiency, all that. And so I don't know if he's like the most undervalued player, like Kirby Smart said yesterday. But I do think he is, Bennett is, the mailman's overlooked a little bit. And I would have him much closer towards that top 5 than I would have him kind of in the back of the pack of the conference. Again, I understand the NFL traits with Rattler and the rest of these guys, which is why, everybody can come from different perspectives with these lists. So is that kind of how you approached it?
Yeah, it's basically projection, where these guys are going to rank by the end of the year. And like the perfect example you use, would Stoops trade Levis for Stetson? Not now, but at the end of the season. So I'm kind of projecting out how they're going to perform as well. And I don't know. I look at it, Stetson. I mean, it seems to me they asked him to win 2 football games, and one was horrible performance, and the other, you're right, he did beat Bryce Young, but Bryce Young was down. I hate that excuse. I don't want to really talk about players getting hurt because Georgia had guys hurt too. But and Bryce threw a pick 6 and they lost the football game. So he did win them that game. But if he's asked to do that 5 times this year, I don't know. I think Georgia's going to lose a game or 2 in that scenario.
It's certainly possible. I do think Georgia's offense is actually going to be even better, and I think
that's what we keep hearing.
and I think that the irony is, and this would be a credit in your favor, or a chit in your favor, is that I think it could be better regardless who plays quarterback, whether Vandergrift's back there, whether Carson Beck's back there, or whether it is Stetson Bennett. And that's because I just think a year ago, everyone's thought Mechie and Williams that Alabama – Georgia's receivers were hurt all season. That's why Brock Bowers became the best tight end in the country. Kyrus Jackson was hurt. Dominique Blaylock's hurt. Pickens didn't play up until the final 2 games of the year. Blaylock's healthy. That's a former 5-star who's going to be, a great slot addition. You got A.D. Mitchell back, Ladd McConkey, and then the tight end room is just, it's absurd. I'm not sure we've ever seen one like it in college football in terms of having Bowers, Eric Gilbert, who's a 5-star. I've seen him up close many times. Darnell Washington. And then, let's just add another 4-star in Oscar Delp. I mean, it's just it's crazy how loaded Todd Hartley's built that room.
Where do you rank Arkansas and A&M? Are they on close to equal footing? And, of course, now we got A&M's arguably the best player. He's not even making it here, right? Because he got in trouble.
No, he is. Yeah, he's. You get charged with some serious stuff. I don't think they bring you to SEC media days.
So I mean that to me, it's like
the SEC West.
The details.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
For sure, I think it's going to be an interesting year for Texas A&M because they have so much hype coming off that historic recruiting class, but then there's. You got to put it together, and Jimbo hasn't quite put it
Let me throw
together.
a stat at you. I don't know how much you put into stuff like this, but my buddy Dave Bartu, CFB Matrix.
Love analytics. Dave, I don't know Dave, but I follow his work. Good
he grades
stuff.
all these guys. He said take out first-year coaches last year. Jimbo Fisher had the worst coaching grade at Power 5 level. And he's got a roster that should be winning 10 and 11 football games. And I understand quarterbacks get hurt, tough schedule, SEC West, a break
he's definitely
here,
he's underwhelmed for sure.
He's not getting it done, and I don't understand why we keep giving him the benefit of the doubt. Even though I know players matter more than anything, they got a loaded roster. I get it, but I got to put Arkansas over A&M.
So I think that you, much like the East, you can make a case for 14. For me, I think you can make a case for 4 teams to finish second in the West. I think folks are sleeping on LSU.
Yeah.
I think Brian Kelly. I don't know where he ranks in that coaching metrics deal.
I think he's right at the top.
But I think he's one of the best. Again, he may not be fun to talk to like Narduzzi, but he knows how to coach a football team. Their issue, my concern with LSU, I've kind of written about them being kind of the sleeper team in the SEC this fall. It's just their roster lives in extremes. They probably have 3 or 4 guys that are going to be first round let's say top 50 picks in next year's NFL draft on this roster, but there's no depth behind them. So if any guy gets hurt, they're likely to crater. And obviously they have a very difficult schedule. Start with Florida State and then go on down. Arkansas, I like the Razorbacks. I think they're going to have the best running game, in the country. I wonder if folks have started to sort of figure out Barry Odom's 3-2-6. You can only kind of sit back in that shell so much. You can only play that red zone roulette, so much. Which is why I did think it was interesting that Bumper Pool and Jalen Catalon earlier this week at SEC Media Days talked about the need to be more aggressive, the need to create more havoc.
And they're getting more man-to-man corners.
More man-to-man corners. You bring in Breeny from Georgia, McGlothern from LSU. I think, I do think Arkansas probably lost that trade with LSU. You bring in Landon Jackson and McGlothern, but then you lose Brooks and Joe. But I think you can make a case again. Arkansas, A&M, LSU, and then there's certainly folks here. I'm not one of them, but there's folks here that believe that Ole Miss isn't going to miss a beat and will finish second again, just like they did a year ago.
Yeah, that's the last thing I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I want to talk underdog real quick. Yeah,
Go for it.
You kind of mentioned it there. Is there a team that we may, like you've got a team in the back of your mind right now that
100%. I got one right here.
sleeping on, they're going to surprise us?
I don't know if Mississippi State is going to catch somebody this year. And I mean a somebody.
They host Georgia.
Alabama. They host Georgia. They play Alabama. But watch them beat. I think the A&M game is somewhere in early October. I forget exactly where it lies on the schedule. A&M. If A&M's a top 10, top 15 team, no, everyone's going to just pencil that one. Oh, they're Mississippi State. They'll beat the Bulldogs.
Yeah.
They're going to catch somebody because they return a ton of production, veteran offensive line, defensive line. They do have to replace, the big tackle there that they lost, but they like the Percy Jones kid that they brought in from JUCO. And again, this is a big season for Mike Leach. We're talking about the if not win, for Tennessee and beating Florida. Kind of a similar deal for Leach in Starkville because if he doesn't put it together with Will Rogers and kind of this collection of veteran talent, it's hard to see him ever kind of getting over the hump with the Bulldogs. But I do think that I don't know where they're going to finish, in terms of the SEC West standings. But I think they're going to be competitive on a weekly basis, and I do think that they are going to legitimately upset a top, 10, 15 team on their schedule this fall.
Last thing I got for you, you hit on Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. Thoughts on him? He's going about it a unique way, building through the transfer portal. I think it's smart in one hand because, maybe he can't compete in high school recruiting with some of the West powers.
Or he doesn't try.
But, well, that's true. But also, he'd have to do it every year. So I'm trying to get you to go maybe a little bold here. But if Ole Miss, let's say they are 10 wins again, Lane Kiffin, do you think he's looking to get out of Ole Miss?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he had wandering eyes this offseason.
Right.
And
Miami, Florida, maybe?
Both of those jobs for certain. I think that he even would not have turned down Oregon, had they come calling. I think certainly if the Harsin thing had completely unraveled and Auburn was open, I don't think Lane is super long for Oxford. As for his philosophy in terms of, these Rebels reinforcements, recruiting through the transfer portal, I think even Lane has been kind of open or at least honest this offseason. He continues to use the same metaphor, so it's a little old now here at SEC Media Days, but his whole basketball analogy of that, you can have this great team on paper, but how does it kind of come together? I think that's a legitimate concern. Now, it's not to say that it won't. It's not to say they can't find cohesion and kind of build that chemistry. But everyone wants to make that comparison with Mel Tucker and Michigan State. Look at all the guys they brought in. That's true. Mel Tucker did that, and he got a $100 million contract out of that. It was a hell of a move for him. But the difference that people forget is that Mel was there for a year. He already had the investment of the rest of the roster. And so those guys were able to then kind of immerse themselves with these reinforcements. Whereas Ole Miss is turning over so much, they're expecting upwards of 20-something people to be starters.
Right.
Those are now just the guys. It's just, all right, well, new name, put them up. We'll see. I love some of the guys they got. I think the UCF kid at wide receiver that Tennessee really wanted is going to be awesome
I like
in
Michael
that
Trigg.
offense. Trigg's going to be awesome. Definitely a concern for me that Dart couldn't outright win the job this spring.
And from what I understand, he's getting huge NIL money. How does that factor into Lane's decision?
Yes.
It's a lot of questions there.
They got a lot of guys getting that are getting huge NIL money. It's funny. Lane has made a lot of complaints about it, but I behind the scenes, I've heard some major numbers associated with Ole Miss. So it's a fascinating season for the Rebels because does Lane want to be there, or how does he? He definitely wants to be there. How long does he want to be there? People are also overlooking just the absurd production that Matt Corral has had the last two seasons. Was not just as a thrower. This is a guy that was running the ball fearlessly, had the locker room, fully on his back. And I think it was 2 seasons ago, led the entire nation in all-purpose yards. Last season was right up there among the tops of any quarterback. That's tough to replace. And you don't just, that's not just, a rinse and repeat by just slotting in a guy, even if Jackson Dart was a 5-star.
Well, thank you for all the time, Jesse. Can
Absolutely.
you tell the audience where to find you and all your work?
Find me at On3, SEC writer at On3. So lots of columns and coverage this week in Atlanta. Be happy to hop on with you guys sometime this fall.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That was